feeling increased pressure from President Trump as the relationship between public health experts and his administration grows more strained. The Washington Post reports that the CDC finds itself forced to backtrack and that it is sidelined from pivotal decisions, including when it is safe for the country to reopen. One Trump advisor told the Post, quote, "There is a view the CDC is staffed with deep state Democrats that are trying to tweak the administration." Meanwhile, White House officials who see the president's re-election prospects tied to economic recovery also say they've been deeply frustrated by what they view as career CDC staffers determined to, quote, keep things closed. That's according to a senior administration official. Jonathan Lemire, so now the deep state has infected the CDC, according to the Trump White House. Anyone who crosses the president must be a member of the deep state, even when they are public health officials.
Yes, that seems to be the new narrative here, Willie. The Washington Post did a nice job tying this all together, but these are whispers that have grown louder throughout the West Wing to reporters in recent weeks, and in particular the last few days, where there's a sense of frustration from those in the building behind me about the CDC, who, first of all, let's remember, they blame in the early days of the pandemic for their first test, the coronavirus test they were developing, being a failure. It was a significant setback. They moved too slow, the White House believes, and valuable time was lost in the early days back in January, February, as the coronavirus was sort of just reaching American shores. And then since then, they feel like the CDC sort of overcorrected and tried to, as hard as this is to believe, spend too much of a focus on the public health concern. The CDC has put roadblocks up in terms of economic reopening, that just in the last week, its guidelines for safely reopening schools were too strict, and the White House has pushed them to reevaluate and is developing some of its own guidelines. Because you're right, this is an administration that from the Oval Office itself has always viewed anyone who sort of gets in the president's way, even just the course of doing their job, career officials, longtime civil servants, are political enemies and should be pushed aside. And we're seeing that here as the president's poll numbers continue to slip, as he has bet so much on this push to return to normalcy, to reopen the economy, which of course includes safely reopening schools, as we've been talking about, Willie, on this show all week. And they feel that the CDC is getting in the way. And the president has been listening less and less to the people there. And as a final point, even to some of the most public faces on his public health team, Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci, though not members of the CDC, of course, were familiar faces to Americans day after day in these coronavirus task force briefings. Dr. Fauci fell out of favor with the president some time ago and has largely been sidelined. And now there's been growing whispers in the West Wing that Dr. Birx has also irritated some of the president's inner circle with conflicting statements and ominous messages to the public. And there's a sense that she is also losing her influence inside the building.
John, I'm still stuck on the fact that you reported that the White House is concerned that the CDC is too focused on the public health consequences of coronavirus. That's literally its job. But there is, Jonathan, there is real pressure on the CDC. We saw it out in the open yesterday when they agreed to change their guidelines on schools because the president thought they were too restrictive. They said, we're going to come back, review, we're going to add some information, we're going to change it, and maybe make it easier to open the schools. That's direct pressure from the president that led to a change in the guidelines that could lead to changes in the way we open our schools.
Right, which will obviously will have significant consequences and complications. I mean, there's a lot unknown here in terms of how to safely reopen schools, how much distancing is needed, are teachers going to be safe? You know, though children for the most part seem to be less impacted by contracting the coronavirus. How much are spreaders? How significant spreaders are they? These are all things that are still being studied and need to be figured out rapidly. As some school districts go back in just a few weeks, it's going to require a lot of research and money to do that. And right now, this is an administration that, frankly, doesn't have a lot of credibility in its handling of the coronavirus pandemic. There have been missteps throughout its response over the months. And yes, the CDC, as we have seen government bureaucracies before, cabinet officials, does seem to be bowing to the political pressure from the president. Officials who don't want to lose their jobs, officials who do want to still curry favor with the president. And sometimes they feel like if we compromise on this, we stay in the room and we can impact for good other changes. It's not clear that's what's happening here at the CDC, but it does seem like things will change. Those guidelines will be altered at least somewhat in the days ahead.